This morning, he's furious at Texas judges for letting felons go free. Houston Police Chief Art Acevedo isn't afraid to speak his mind. Does he have political ambitions? We'll ask him from Houston. Tom Steyers is betting big on Texas, the Democratic presidential candidate launching an ad blitz and opening offices here. Steyer is also one of our guests this morning. Democrats running for U.S. Senate met in Austin, but did that debate really change anything? It's one of our questions for Ross Ramsey. And the most contentious congressional race in Texas, Kay Granger facing another last-minute offensive from Republican Chris Putnam in North Texas.
Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley starts now.
And good morning. A busy week in Texas politics. Before we get to our first guest, let's first get you caught up on the top statewide stories we are watching. Let's start with early voting. This is the final week before Super Tuesday. Already some interesting data from the first week of turnout. Democrats are voting big time. In fact, in the top 5 Texas counties, Democrats could double their early voting numbers compared to the 2016 presidential election. One of the groups that helped flip Virginia from red to blue is now coming to Texas. The group called Everytown for Gun Safety says it will spend $8 million on commercials and candidates in this state. That's 3 times more than it spent in Virginia. The group pushes for things like universal background checks and red flag laws. And a longtime Democratic state senator from Austin is stepping down. Kirk Watson will become the dean of the University of Houston's Hobby School of Public Affairs. The former Austin mayor has served in the Texas Senate since 2006, and his last day as a senator will be at the end of April. The term Texas justice is often synonymous with tough on crime. Our first guest says the reality, though, is far from that. Houston Police Chief Art Acevedo is not afraid to speak his mind, and he unleashed about it on Facebook the other day. Chief Acevedo wrote, once again, a suspect already charged with murder and 2 aggravated assaults in 2017 was out on bond, and now he is about to be charged with murder again. This is beyond outrageous, the chief wrote. When will the people of Harris County, Texas, and our nation wake up and hold judges accountable? Chief Acevedo is with us from Houston. Chief, good morning to you.
Hey, good morning. Good to be here.
Thanks for joining us from Houston. Let's start with Texas justice. You wrote on Facebook the other day that 25% of suspects charged with murders in Houston were already on probation or parole. What in the world is going on?
Well, you know, we're living at a time where Texas in the 70s, 80s, and 90s was the, lock them up and throw away the key state, to the state where you can't get them out of jail fast enough. And so we've taken criminal justice reform to an extent where we're putting suspects above victim, and where common sense has really been thrown away with the old proverbial key. So we've got to recalibrate and start letting people know what's going on in our state.
Is this a problem with the legislature, or is this a problem with local judges? Where do you see fault?
Well, I think it's a problem with all the above, okay? I mean, we've got activists that believe that no one should be behind bars, that, you know, everybody should, that somehow the criminal is the victim instead of the other way around. We've got judges that are activist judges that their idea of probable cause, we're not sure what it is, because they're kicking out cases left and right. Despite the fact that there's absolute probable cause. We've got judges that are giving people slaps on the wrist. And quite frankly, what we need is the legislature to step in and to have especially for violent criminals and repeat offenders like burglars, to step in and come up with some parameters that is not just based on money, but based on risk. What is the risk of flight, and what is the risk of public safety? And when you have murderers in Texas's largest city and across the state that are getting out with $5,000 in cash or $10,000 in cash, and while on bail are killing other people, that is a problem. And it's time for us to speak up, because children and our neighbors and our friends are being murdered by people that should have never been on the streets in the first place.
And is this an issue with like a bond schedule, the paper that the judges go by, or is this just judges being soft on crime?
I think that it's, quite frankly, it's judges that aren't holding people accountable, that aren't making an assessment. And last session, I know that John Whitmire, who's the Dean of the Senate and the Criminal Justice Committee, wanted to pass some legislation in terms of having a tool that's a risk assessment tool that, again, scores what people, in terms of their criminal history, the nature of the crime, whether or not they should have bail, and quite frankly, too many people are out on low bond or no cash at all.
How did we get to this step? Because the term Texas justice is known as, what you mentioned, the tough, make sure you pay for the crime you did. How did we even arrive here?
Well, I think on the extreme left, it's about civil liberties and let's restore people and let's lift them up, and I'm all for that. But we've got to use common sense. On the extreme right, it's about either kowtowing to the bail industry, or quite frankly, we don't want to pay the cost of incarcerating people. But what people don't understand is that when somebody dies, the economic toll is tremendous for every murder, and the emotional and psychological and quality of life toll for the people of Texas is astronomical. And so we've got to bring transparency back into the criminal justice system. Law enforcement's always under the microscope. It's time to put the microscope under the district attorney's office in our state and the judges in our state, because they need to be able to answer and be held accountable for the decisions they're making that's impacting safety.
Our station there in Houston, KHOU, actually did a story about the number of people who are involved in high-speed chases, running from you guys down there on the freeways in Houston. And more than half of those people that you finally catch and arrest never serve any prison time, despite this being a third-degree felony.
And what people don't understand is that crooks, believe it or not, they do a risk versus benefit analysis. Look, we pursue here in this city.
Do they really?
We have very. Oh, absolutely. I can show you, we can try to get you videos where people are in a wire, and crooks will make decisions. Back in my days in Austin, between Travis County and Williamson County, Travis was extremely progressive and sometimes soft on crime. Williamson was extremely draconian and really sometimes too tough on crime. And we try to set up a deal in the Williamson County corner of an intersection where the Travis County corner is on the other side of the intersection. And we have real stories of Texas policing where the crook would say, oh no, let's not do it at that gas station. That's Williamson County. Let's do it at this gas station across the intersection because it's Travis County. So they pay attention. And last, let me just say one last thing that this thing's really important. We can't keep catching violent felons with a history of violence, with a history of committing violence against others, with firearms. They're prohibited from having them, and nothing's done to them. We have got to hold these violent criminals accountable for unlawful possession of a firearm, and that's something that I hope that the governor and the legislature will look at as well.
Chief, you've never been afraid to speak your mind. You're one of the few police chiefs in Texas that really gets out there and says what's on your mind. Do you have any political aspirations? You know what? We live in a world where what I know is that I equally anger the extreme left and the extreme right, and people that are focused more on good policy, on common sense, on trying to have an impact, really have no place in either political party, because both of them, when it comes to their bases, are out of touch with the rest of the people in Texas and the United States. And I think that's why there's so much frustration in our nation right now. All right, Chief Art Acevedo from the Houston Police Department, thanks so much for being here. Hey, thanks for having me. The Democrats running for U.S. Senate met in Austin last week for their final debate before Super Tuesday. They were quizzed on everything from Medicare to marijuana. We even watched some subtle attacks among them, but no one went on the offensive. MJ Hagar was the front runner going in and likely the front runner coming out as well. Ross Ramsey is watching this race. He's the co-founder and executive editor of the Texas Tribune in Austin. Good morning to you, Ross.
Good morning, Jason. How are you?
We're doing well. You know, just before the debate, the Texas Tribune released a poll on this race. I cannot imagine it has moved very much after the debate.
I don't think so. You know, the noteworthy thing in the poll was that Texas Democrats still don't know who their candidates are. There are a dozen people in this race. The best known of them among Texas Democratic voters is Hagar with 31%. It's a very uncertain environment. Whoever has a couple of pennies to rub together to get on TV and get some name recognition could get into the runoff.
And early voting is underway. In fact, we're starting our second and final week of early voting. And you know, there are plenty of things to watch for in other races as well.
Yeah, you know, we're watching turnout. You know, 2018, the turnout was really big. It was a big change in what happened in Texas that year. There was a big turnout in 2008. We're waiting to see if the presidential race in particular draws a lot of people to the polls. Also waiting to see if the rise of Bernie Sanders, whose numbers have been increasing in Texas, continues through the election, and what happens with Mike Bloomberg, who wasn't running just a minute ago and is already up to 10 or 15% of the vote.
Yeah, what happens with Bloomberg? We will be watching that. Back to you in a moment, Ross. Thank you. Last week in Nevada, we watched Democratic presidential candidates unload on Michael Bloomberg, clearly aware of the threat he presents. This morning, an opinion on this from the right. Here's Chris Crock from WBAP AM radio in Dallas with My Voice, My Opinion.
Bloomberg opens offices in Texas, Bernie rallies in Mesquite. What does this all say of the Democrats' chances against Trump in Texas and across the nation? It shows they have no one. There is not one clear leader in the race, nor will there be. It's chaos. If Bernie, the clear leader right now, doesn't get the nomination, his people will stay home and not vote. It'll be the second time they say it was rigged against them. Biden is done, and we all know that. So now the new hope is a first ever. A man who's literally buying his way into the race, and Democrats are so desperate they'll take him with open arms. The man continues to grossly offend just about everybody daily with comments from his past now haunting him. Elderly with cancer? Let him die. Black and Latino young men? Xerox a copy of him and throw him up against the wall. Women in the workplace? I can't even say the vulgar things that came out this week, but it's okay as long as he can beat Trump. Wow, this is something to behold. Good luck, Dems. I'm Chris Crock, and that's my voice, my opinion.
Coming up, Tom Steyer is betting big on Texas, buying commercials and opening offices as Texans are already early voting. We are going to talk to that Democratic presidential candidate when we return. And will Kay Granger remain in Congress? Challenger Chris Putnam is launching more ads trying to defeat the Republican incumbent. You're watching Inside Texas Politics. Take out your phone this morning and open up the camera. You're going to need it in just a moment because you're about to get a chance to hear from Texas's top lawman in a way you have never heard him before. Attorney General Ken Paxton had a beer with us on this week's episode of Y'all-itics, and he covered a lot, like why he is suing California, how he is taking on Google to protect your privacy, and yes, we did ask him about being indicted for securities fraud, a case that has been waiting to go to trial for 5 years.
Even have to present evidence when they get an indictment. So you have to live with this, and that's why there's a constitutional right to a speedy trial, which apparently I'm not going to get.
You've obviously been in the law for a long time. Has this changed your perspective about the law at all?
Absolutely.
Just being on that
How
side
so?
of it. In what way?
I have less confidence in the criminal justice system.
You want to hear this conversation, so use your camera right now to scan this QR code on your screen, then tap on the pop-up to go right to the Ken Paxton episode in Apple Podcasts. You can also go to WFAA.com/Y'all-itics. Wherever you get your podcast, be sure to subscribe. A new episode drops every Tuesday. Have you seen these yet? Tom Steyer is betting big on Texas as we count down to Super Tuesday. Steyer is running commercials across this state. He just opened an office in Dallas a couple days ago as well. You know, Steyer polled well in Nevada, but he remains a long shot candidate, especially in Texas. So where does he see a path to victory? We talked to him from Las Vegas. Tom, thanks for the time.
Jason, it's great to be with you.
Texans are seeing your ads on TV right now. What is your last-minute polling in Texas telling you?
Look, what I'm seeing coming out of Nevada and going into South Carolina is that my campaign has a ton of momentum. I am putting together a coalition of Americans, of diverse Democrats, including black people, Latinos, Asian Americans, Native Americans, and white people. That's the kind of coalition that any Democrat's going to need both to secure the nomination, but also, most importantly, to beat Mr. Trump in November. So what people in Texas need to know is you can see from Nevada and going into South Carolina that I have the momentum coming into Super Tuesday to be a force and to pull together a party that can only win if it's together and not fractured. And that's what I'm doing.
And Tom, the last poll we saw here in Texas had you like at 3%. Are you seeing higher numbers than that in your own polling?
I think it's going to be, I think any one of those polls is going to have to take into account the results of Nevada and the results of South Carolina, because I think I've been spending my time, Jason, in the two diverse states as part of the primary process before Super Tuesday to show that I can have that momentum and can pull together that coalition. And that's what I've been doing.
Tom, for people who aren't as familiar with your candidacy, how do you differentiate yourselves from other Democrats?
I have spent the last 10 years, I started a business from scratch, Jason. Built it up over 27 years, multi-billion-dollar international business, walked away from it, took the giving pledge to give most of my money away to good causes while I'm alive. And for 10 years, I've been putting together coalitions of Americans to take on unchecked corporate power. We've beaten oil companies, we've beaten tobacco companies, we've beaten utilities, we've beaten drug companies, we've never lost. And so what I'm trying to do is go to Washington, D.C. and bring that same spirit as an outsider of beating the corporations who've bought our government and get back the government for the people so that, in fact, we can deliver the progressive promise of affordable health care as a right, of quality public education, including universal pre-K, of a living wage for every American, and of clean air and clean water. I'm the outsider who's beaten corporations for a decade and can do it in D.C.
Tom, I want to ask you one more question in our final moments here. Several candidates in the Nevada debate suggested that Democrats do not need a billionaire candidate. They were aiming that specifically at Mike Bloomberg, but they were saying that, billionaire candidates are out of touch. You too are a billionaire. You talked about the business you started from scratch. What would you tell Texans who might wonder whether you really understand their struggles?
Well, let me say this, Jason. I'm an outsider. I've been putting together coalitions to fight corporations as an outsider successfully for 10 years. If you believe that corporations have bought the government in Washington, D.C., which I believe, and that it's broken, you have to ask yourself who's going to go in there and really fix it. Is it somebody from the outside who's talking about 12-year term limits for every senator or congressman? Or is it somebody from inside the Beltway who's a career politician who's claiming they're really going to reform Washington, D.C.? I'm telling you that the person you can trust is the person who has over a decade of showing that he'll take on the corporations and beat them, that in fact I've started a non-profit bank to support black people, Latinos, and women who are getting mistreated and discriminated against in the financial system, somebody who has a history of doing the right thing and succeeding. That's the person you can trust.
Tom, thanks for the time. We appreciate it. Good luck on Super Tuesday.
Thank you, Jason.
This coming Saturday, South Carolina has its presidential primary, and it has Texans wondering if they should skip early voting and wait to see who wins there before going to the polls here. We'll talk about the reasons why next on the Roundtable.
This is Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley.
Time now for Reporters Roundtable to put the headlines in perspective. Ross is back. Bud Kennedy from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram is here. And Bernadine Steptoe, the political producer at WFAA in Dallas, is with us as well. And Ross, let's start with you. Texas voters have a decision to make. Do they go ahead and vote early? This is the final week, as you and I discussed. Or do they wait and see who gets out of the South Carolina primary that happens next Saturday?
I think voters really aren't part of the punditry. I think they vote when it's convenient and not when it's strategic. And I think, most of the time you get people voting early because they either want to get it out of the way or, like I say, it just fits into their schedule. About half of Texans vote early, about half vote on Election Day. It would be interesting if they waited for Nevada, but I don't think they will.
What's the temperature, do you think, Bud, after the Nevada debate?
Jason, I think it's different. I think the Republicans are all piling in early, and the Democrats are voting pretty heavily, but there's still a lot of Democrats hanging back. Only the top Democrats get any delegates. The last time we had a poll, Sanders and Biden were really the only two candidates in contention in Texas. Warren may be up there now, maybe Bloomberg might get a delegate. But, they want to see who's in and who's out before they go vote.
And Bernadine, no doubt everybody on the roundtable here is fascinated to see what happens in South Carolina. That's the big firewall that Joe Biden was talking about. Do you think Texas voters really care about that?
I don't think so. I think the only reason that they don't vote early is because they just don't want to. Because by now they've probably made up their mind. Look at the early voting turnout. Democrats are voting in higher numbers than they did in 2016.
Well, and Jason, let's make a point here. People ought to vote early if you can, because on Tuesday you don't know, it might be storming, you might have a flat tire. You need to vote when you can.
Yeah,
that's true.
Exactly. But I guess the bottom line is, Ross, do you think that anybody, even on Super Tuesday, is going to say, hey, Biden might not have done so well in X state, maybe I should put my vote somewhere else, even on Election Day itself?
Yeah, I'm going to be a skeptic here. I think most people vote for the candidate they want, or vote against a candidate that they don't want, and vote less because they think X or Y is going to win or is up this week, and more about that's the candidate I support. So I think a lot of people might look at their early vote when the results come out and say, well, I gave that one away, but I don't know if they think about it in advance.
Let's talk about a guest we had last week on the program, Chris Putnam. He's a Republican challenger who is trying to, throw out Kay Granger, a longtime congresswoman from Tarrant County and Wise County. But I'm curious, Putnam is laying on more ads. He is really trying to go after her, and this race could be close.
Putnam has another $1 million in ads coming, probably some during this show. He is running really hard against this congresswoman who's one of the top Republican budget writers in the House. If she were defeated, it'd be one of the biggest Republican primary knockoffs in years. One of the highest people in Congress to be knocked off. Granger's message has been more subtle. In order to win, she needs to turn out all the workers at Lockheed, 18,000 people who build those F-35s. She needs to turn out women in the district. He needs to keep turning out the church voters and the gun voters and the people in his corner.
And Bernadine, it seems to me, just unscientific judging on Facebook and maybe Twitter that Putnam really has grassroots behind him. That's going to be hard for Granger, isn't it?
Well, I think he has some grassroots behind him.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, she has been in office a long time. And you have to wonder if she has actually made her supporters as mad as Putnam wants to indicate that she has.
Yeah.
I think that, and then keep in mind, she has those older voters as well who do come out and vote.
And we will see who comes out and votes on Election Day on Super Tuesday. Guys, thank you very much. We appreciate it. And thank you for watching as well for this week's Inside Texas Politics. We'll see you again next Sunday. Hope you have a good day.